It was just 2 weeks before Christmas, and Mr. John's home buzzed with activity. The children were dashing around full of excitement for their upcoming trip to the village, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. This wasn't their first visit. Every year, the family returned to the village during the holidays, the only time they reunited with relatives there. The children looked forward to it, the clean air, tall trees, and the joy of playing with their cousins. However, this year would be unlike any other, and not in a good way. Mr. John's wife, was busy preparing for the journey. She packed clothes and made snacks well in advance, as she always did, to ensure nothing was forgotten. Still, one thing always troubled her. Mr. John never joined her in prayer. "John, let's just pray for 2 minutes," she pleaded while folding clothes into a travel bag. Waving her off dismissively, Mr. John replied, "Stop bothering me. God knows we're traveling. He doesn't need a reminder to protect us." He chuckled as he said it. Ooh's heart sank. She looked at him and quietly muttered, "Why don't you understand?" The children weren't much different. The older ones had started mimicking their father. Whenever knelt for morning prayers, they would grumble and drag their feet, saying, "Mama, why do we have to do this every day? It's boring." Still, never gave up. She continued to pray daily for her family's safety, even as they rolled their eyes or walked away. Yet deep down, she longed for Mr. John to join her, just once. The house remained lively, filled with laughter and the children's chatter about their plans in the village. Mr. John enjoyed watching their excitement, while quietly observed her family, holding her breath and whispering a prayer. "Lord, keep us safe this Christmas." As Christmas approached, the family remained unaware that something waited for them along the road, something that would test their beliefs and alter their lives permanently. One evening, Mr. John was driving home from work, thinking about the upcoming trip. As he turned a corner, he noticed an elderly woman by the roadside, waving for assistance. Her wrapper was tightly secured around her waist, and she held a small basket. He slowed the car and pulled up beside her. "Mama, where are you headed?" he asked, leaning slightly out of the window. "My son," she replied, her voice weary. "I'm going just down the next street. Could you give me a ride?" Mr. John nodded. "Get in, Mama." She climbed in and quietly settled into the passenger seat. For a while, they drove in silence, with only the hum of the engine and distant chirping of crickets breaking the stillness. Then, she cleared her throat gently. "My son," she said, "I hope you won't be upset by what I'm about to say." Mr. John glanced at her, intrigued. "What is it, Mama?" The woman inhaled slowly and spoke with calm certainty. "You must not travel to the village this Christmas. And if you must go, you and your family need to pray and fast beforehand. There is danger ahead." Her words lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. Mr. John burst into laughter, a loud, hearty laugh that filled the car. The old woman's expression grew stern. "Mama, you expect me to cancel my family's trip to the village?" Mr. John asked, shaking his head. "This isn't our first time traveling for Christmas. Nothing will happen." She met his gaze, her eyes steady and serious. "I've said what I needed to say. The rest is in your hands, my son." When they arrived at her stop, Mr. John pulled over, and the old woman slowly stepped out. She turned to him one last time and said, "Thank you for the ride. But remember, pray and fast if you must go." Mr. John gave a casual wave and a smile. "Thank you, Mama. Take care of yourself." As he continued driving, he shook his head and thought, why do people enjoy spreading fear with stories like that? He told himself she was just superstitious, or perhaps trying to sound wise. After all, he had taken this trip many times before. Nothing unusual had ever happened. Yet behind him, the old woman stood still in the fading light, her face unreadable. Her message had been delivered. What would happen next was beyond her control. 2 days before Christmas, the house was alive with excitement. Bags lined the entryway, neatly packed with clothes, gifts, and snacks for the long trip. The children danced around happily, talking about the village and the fun that awaited them with their cousins. Ooh, as always, remained composed. Before they left, she gathered everyone in the living room. "Let's take a moment to pray before we begin our journey," she said, her voice calm but firm. Mr. John frowned. "Ooh, must you always insist on praying? We're not heading to outer space." "It's just the village," Mr. John said dismissively. "Let me go start the car." He waved her off and stepped outside. Yu sighed quietly, knelt down, and prayed alone with the children. She whispered her usual request, "Lord, protect us and guide my family." Outside, Mr. John got into the driver's seat and turned the ignition key. But instead of the engine coming to life, there was silence. He tried again. The engine sputtered weakly, then went quiet again. What's going on now? Mr. John muttered to himself. He got out, lifted the bonnet, and stared at the engine, as if expecting an answer. After fiddling with a few wires, he tried again. Still nothing. Frustrated, he returned to the house. "The car won't start. I've no idea what's wrong with it," he said, scratching his head. Ooh looked at him, with her usual calm. "Maybe it's God's way of telling us not to go," she said quietly. Mr. John snapped. "Stop saying that. What does God have to do with an engine problem? I'll call the mechanic." The mechanic arrived shortly, his tools clanking as he worked under the bonnet. After inspecting the engine for a while, he stood up and shook his head. "Oga, the engine is knocked. This car isn't going anywhere until it's properly repaired." Mr. John's jaw dropped. "Knocked? But I drove this car just yesterday. There was nothing wrong with it." The mechanic shrugged. "Sometimes these things happen, sir. It's out of my hands." Ooh offered a faint smile. "God understands," she said, her voice calm. Mr. John rolled his eyes and mocked her. "God understands, right?" Then he sighed, clearly frustrated. "So what now? Are we just going to sit here and cancel Christmas?" Ooh remained quiet, watching him pace back and forth like a restless lion. After a few minutes, Mr. John clapped his hands decisively. "We'll head to the motor park and board a commercial bus. It's not ideal, but we're still going." Ooh hesitated. "Maybe we shouldn't go at all," she suggested gently. "Don't start again, Ooh," Mr. John said sharply. "I've already made my decision." And with that, the matter was settled. The bags were quickly repacked for the bus trip. The children, still full of excitement, got ready for the journey. But Ooh's heart remained heavy, and silently she continued to pray. Silently, Ooh whispered, "Lord, take control." However, unknown to Mr. John and his family, not everyone in the village welcomed their yearly visits. Far away in the village, though the air remained still, Mama Amaka's heart churned with unrest. She sat outside her mud-walled home, eyes fixed on the dusty road, her face twisted with resentment. Each year, Mr. John and his family arrived like royalty. Their gleaming car drew the attention of everyone. His wife, Ooh, and the children always appeared healthy, well-dressed, and cheerful. Meanwhile, her own 4 sons could barely afford to come home, and when they did, it was either on worn-out bicycles or on foot. Clenching her fists, Mama Amaka murmured, "Why must every Christmas revolve around John?" Jealousy bubbled within her. She decided things had to change this year. She called out for her closest confidant. "Sister," she said in a hushed tone to Mama E, "I can't take it anymore. This time, that boy and his family must not come here flaunting their riches." Mama E, known for her sharp tongue, nodded in agreement. "You're right, Amaka. It's time you did something about it." Without delay, the 2 women ventured deep into the forest, where the village's witches lived. The path was dark, lined, with trees bending low as if eavesdropping. When they reached the witch's hut, a chilling breeze passed through, sending a shiver up their spines. The head witch, an old woman with a face as crumpled as a dried leaf, greeted them with an eerie calm. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice echoing like thunder. Mama Amaka knelt before her, head bowed. "I need your help. My stepson, John, must not arrive in this village alive. His success has shamed me and my children for too long." The witches burst into laughter, a sound sharp and unsettling, like glass cracking. "Is that all?" the leader said, her eyes glowing. "Consider it done." They circled around a pot bubbling with a thick black liquid. One of them dropped. In a piece of cloth Mama Amaka had brought, a scrap from John's shirt from his last visit. Another witch sprinkled ashes into the mixture, chanting words that twisted the air. The leader raised her hand, and a heavy silence fell over the hut. "They will not arrive alive," she pronounced. "A deadly accident awaits them on the road." A dark satisfaction swelled in Mama Amaka's chest. She placed a few coins into the old woman's hands as payment, and the witches laughed wickedly while sealing the final curse. "It is done," the leader said, her voice as cold as stone. That night, Mama Amaka returned home, her expression calm but her heart rejoicing. She pictured it clearly: John's vehicle wrecked, his family lost, and the village in mourning. At last, no one would outshine her sons. Meanwhile, in the city, the next morning came early. Mr. John and his family arrived at the motor park. The place was buzzing with travelers and vendors shouting as they sold bread, sachet water, and roasted corn. The children held tight to their bags, bubbling with excitement as they watched the buses being loaded. Mr. John, holding the tickets, guided his family toward their assigned vehicle. It lacked the comfort of their car, but it would get them to the village. As they settled into their seats, Ooh gently spoke above the chatter. "Please, let's pray before we begin the journey." She rose to her feet and glanced around at the other passengers. Some nodded quietly and closed their eyes, while others ignored her, murmuring among themselves. Mr. John's face flushed with discomfort. "Ooh, sit down," he whispered sharply. "You're embarrassing me. This is public transport, not a church." But Ooh remained calm. She closed her eyes and prayed in a steady voice. "Lord, protect us on this journey. Watch over this bus and every soul aboard." "Amen," a few passengers replied under their breath, while others rolled their eyes in silence. Mr. John muttered to himself, "She'll never change." The engine rumbled to life, and the bus pulled away, leaving the city behind. Buildings gave way to trees and open roads. The children pointed out sights, laughing and chatting with excitement. Mr. John, swayed by the rhythm of the road, eventually drifted off to sleep, his head resting against the window. For a time, everything was peaceful. The road stretched ahead, and the hum of the engine filled the air. But midway through the journey, that peace was suddenly shattered. The driver's panicked voice rang out. The brakes! The brakes aren't working!" His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the bus began to sway violently, veering from side to side. Panic spread like wildfire. Passengers screamed, bags toppled, children cried. Ooh pulled her children close, whispering urgent prayers under her breath, her arms wrapped tightly around them. Up ahead, a massive tanker truck appeared, blocking nearly the entire road. The driver fought to steer, but the bus would not respond. The wheels screeched. The bus lurched forward at full speed. Terrified screams filled the air. Time seemed to slow. Amid the chaos, Ooh's voice rose above it all, strong and clear. "Lord, save us!" And then with a thunderous crash, the bus slammed into the tanker. Metal crumpled. Glass shattered. And suddenly everything went silent. Far away in the village, a whisper of wind carried the news that arrived long before the sun dipped below the horizon. Word of the accident spread rapidly, moving from household to household, like fire in dry grass. Groups of villagers gathered, shaking their heads and murmuring in disbelief. "Have you heard? John and his entire family were in a terrible accident." Mama Amaka, upon hearing the news, collapsed dramatically to the ground. Her wrapper flew as she beat her chest in staged grief. "Oh, my son, my stepchildren! What did we ever do to deserve such sorrow?" she wailed, her cries drawing attention from all directions. Yet beneath her loud sobs, something darker stirred, a grim satisfaction. She believed her plan had worked. No one, she thought, would come this year to steal the spotlight from her sons. Her tears, however, were nothing more than a performance. Back at the accident scene, emergency help finally arrived. Amid the twisted wreckage and broken glass, Oo and her children were discovered, visibly shaken, but unharmed. Not a single bruise or scratch marked their bodies. Not a single mark stained their skin. It was as though an invisible hand had shielded them from harm. Mr. John, however, was not as fortunate. Sitting in the front seat, he had taken the full impact of the collision. Though he survived, both of his legs were crushed beyond saving. The rescuers quickly rushed him to the hospital, with Oo and the children close behind, hearts heavy but grateful he was still alive. At the hospital, Oo knelt beside her husband's bed. Her children huddled around her. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she prayed, her voice trembling. "Lord, you saved us from the accident. Please, don't take my husband. Let him live." Mr. John's condition was critical. The doctors worked tirelessly through the night, and by morning he opened his eyes, weak but alive. The news of his survival spread, and Oo's heart overflowed with gratitude. Later that day, the old woman, the same one Mr. John had picked up on the roadside, walked quietly into the hospital room. Though her steps were slow, her presence filled the space. She stood beside his bed and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see into his soul. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Mr. John nodded weakly. "Yes, Mama." She took a seat and spoke gently. "I warned you not to travel to the village this Christmas. I begged you to pray and fast, but you didn't listen." She shook her head slowly, her voice low, but firm. "If not for your wife's prayers, you and your children would be gone. It was her faith that built a wall around you. John's eyes welled with tears. He turned to look at Oo, who stood quietly by, her hands folded, her face calm. The old woman continued, "Your stepmother, Mama Amaka, went to the witches. She cursed you, but God is stronger than any curse. Your wife's prayers were heard. That is what saved you." Mr. John wept openly, his voice cracking. "I was foolish. I mocked prayer. I ignored the warnings." The old woman laid a hand gently on his shoulder and said, "Let this be your lesson. Never underestimate the power of prayer, and never ignore when God sends you a message." From that day forward, Mr. John was a changed man. When he left the hospital, he became the first to call his family together for prayer every morning, kneeling beside Oo, his voice full of gratitude. On Sundays, he was the earliest to church, singing louder than anyone else. As for the village, Mr. John never returned for Christmas again. The memory of what had happened, and the pain of knowing his stepmother had tried to destroy his family, kept him away. It wasn't until many years later, after Mama Amaka passed away, that he visited the village again. But this time he returned, with a humble heart and a spirit filled with thankfulness. The story of Mr. John's accident and miraculous survival spread across towns and cities. It became a lesson shared in homes, churches, and gatherings, a powerful reminder that prayer is the strongest shield against unseen dangers, and that not everyone celebrates your blessings. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share, Your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful and inspiring tales. Thank you for watching.